Europe has made as much progress on defense as it had since the 1950s, with creating a structured cooperation, a European fund, and now this new intervention European fund that will make it possible to better coordinate between countries across Europe's most engaged armed forces. All of these initiatives are compatible with our commitment within NATO, but what is new is that Europe is now equipped with a new force, and I believe this is the most adequate answer to the new geopolitical situation globally, and something that will cement Europe. It used to be that Europeans didn't feel that Europe was defending them, protecting them, and this is going to change. We have also talked about commerce, and on this point, we have started working on that in Sofia, and I must say that I welcome the fact that we have showed a unified front in the face of this American attack. We decided that we didn't want to remain passive and that we would continue to push our agenda with the WTO and in particular within the framework of G20. We had already made proposals in that sense a few weeks ago. These proposals to reform the WTO, accelerate the procedure, accelerate the conflict settlement procedure are things that we're going to continue to push forward. In terms of cybersecurity, as France and Germany, we will make progress very quickly in the next few months, as well as on taxation and the creation of a European Agency for Disruptive Technologies, Disruptive Innovation. Those are all important things because, you know, in our Europe, of course, there are times of crisis and tension, but we can only move ahead as Europe if we are able to launch new projects, take new initiatives, not just be responsive to crisis. On all of these essential topics for military, economic, and financial sovereignty, Europe is continuing to move ahead and taking important, helpful decisions, and we, as the French, are in particular pushing our points of view. The new message is that we can no longer wait on Brexit. There has been good progress. Michel Barnier recently made a reasonable proposal or suggestion in that sense, and we need to seize that opportunity. The last barrier being the Irish border issue. And let me come back to one aspect which has been heavily in the news recently, migration. Recently, as we have in the past years, we are living through troubled times where Europe needs to find unity and effectiveness. If we are clear-eyed about what's happening with those migration flows, there has been a real crisis around 2015 with massive arrivals from people who were in exile, who were refugees from the Near East and the Middle East, a strong pressure from people coming through the Mediterranean, the central Mediterranean road with Mare Nostrum. But in the meantime, arrivals from the central Mediterranean, there has been a stark reduction, 80% reduction this year compared with last year, because there's already been a lot of work and a lot of commitment. I do not underestimate the migratory pressure in Europe that exists for Europe right now because of all these arrivals. And 1.5 people that have arrived, that have entered Europe's territory since the beginning of that crisis. However, this situation will not be solved overnight, and over time we will keep seeing this kind of pressure in light of the inequality that exists between Africa and Europe because of the many conflict areas in Africa and in the Middle East. And so on this topic, we should not make promises that we cannot keep. We should be aware of that. I know that it's easy to become emotional. I get emotional too, but we should think of the longer term. And preparing for action on the long term means that we need to have a Europe that is up to its own values, up to the task of maintaining and upholding its own values. I'm thinking of, for France, for example, asylum rights, our tradition of hospitality, protecting people who are seeing risks for their lives in their countries because of war or because of persecution. The asylum right, of course, does not account for the whole of the migrant situation. And it's important to say that. It doesn't mean that you need to take in everyone independent of the circumstances of how they've come to Europe. But we need to remember the principles. And the second principle is effectiveness. We need to be consistent as a bloc in Europe. And so we need to protect our borders. That is a legitimate task of ours. We need to make sure that there is not a growth of fear and extreme political positions and discourse in Europe. But at the same time, that means that we should not be naive about what is going on. And then we need to be effective over time, on the long term, to stop these flows and meet the challenge. And so, in light of the situation that we're in, there are several possibilities. Some people wanted to go down the nationalist road. That would have led to the absence of an agreement, and there have been threats of that. And the other possibility was cooperation, European-level work to keep making progress. And this is the second possibility, the second choice that was made during this council meeting, and I'm very glad that it was. We have come back to the facts, to the responsibility and solidarity principles which are at the heart of our continent, and we have been able to build what I would call an important accord, an important agreement, which is only one step and which relies on a very comprehensive approach. Externally, that was one of the proposals made by the presidency, and so that's led to the creation of Disembarkment Centre, something that some European countries have already done. We've done that in France for Libya or for Niger. That means that you need to have the agreement of the countries in question. It also presupposes a major work with the UN Human Rights Commission. The African Union has also been instrumental in moving in that direction over the past months and years. These disembarkment platforms are valuable in that they help better protect people because they spare them the risk of having to cross the Mediterranean, and within the Human Rights Committee and International Migration Organization framework, they help us work on migration by sending our own teams to Africa. Of course, this will have to be done in every case under the authority of the countries in question. On this point, we also agreed to reinforce our action with the various security forces. I'm thinking particularly of the Libyan Coast Guard, acting in Libyan on the Libyan coast, which has been very helpful over the past few months in preventing some risks for human life and to better protect our common borders. The second aspect of our work was reinforcing the common border of Europe. We agreed to accelerate the deployment of Frontex and to put in place extra forces. And we particularly focused on first arrival countries. And I feel that is one of the important parts of this agreement. And it is based on the proposals that we and the Spaniards made when President Sanchez visited France. Since the beginning of the Italian crisis, indeed, we have asked the question of whether any country could be spared the responsibility of dealing with the migrant flows, which would not conform with the Dublin agreements. And so we concluded that the Dublin rules would still be enforced and that we could not just abolish the concept of first arrival country. What we have done, however, is bring a solidarity-based answer to that through the controlled centers in Europe. Such centers would be interesting in that they would help the first arrival countries to benefit from European support to take in the migrants, review their applications, and send them back if their applications have not been accepted. The burden for that is mostly borne by a few countries. In fact, the Greek Prime Minister has said so very recently. He said that he supported this new system and would apply it. And when you would see the kind of burden that Greece is dealing with, these centers will certainly help with the situation. And it is an answer, in my opinion, to Italy's request. It is a compromise solution. We're not changing the rules of international maritime law. We are not changing our legal responsibilities, but we are bringing more solidarity through these control centers and more effectiveness in terms of sending people back to their original country of origin. We have also continued work on the Dublin system by reinforcing the responsibility of the entry point countries and the solidarity of Europe by working on improving the modalities, being firm on the principle, and working on an agenda to, or deadline to finalize the directives, and in particular the seven directives, which we will now have to sign. It is, in my view, a priority if we are to finalize all of the issues that we're dealing with. This will certainly be the most effective approach. So as you see, this approach, on the one hand, makes it possible for Europe not to
Aurions-nous échoué à trouver un accord ou à préférer des solutions nationales ou décider de trahir nos principes avec des modalités techniques
or helps Europe be up to the task of meeting its own responsibilities. We have found an agreement that is in line with our values, gives a lot of answers that are responsibility and solidarity based, and makes it possible to move forward. It is an agreement that helps us build the future. It doesn't solve everything, but it does give a number of actual effective answers to the ongoing crisis. And because its agenda is comprehensive, internal, external, legal, it helps find answers to the questions raised by Italy in terms of primary migrations, or in terms of German concerns as regards secondary migrations. So there will be further steps, I'm sure, but I feel that this is an important agreement and one which creates an effective framework for us to work in whilst respecting our own principles. We also had an important discussion on reforming the Eurozone this morning, and we started thinking in terms of work streams based on the Meseberg agreement. and the letter written by Mr. Centeno, who's the head of the Eurogroup. Now, these work streams are going to start being implemented in the coming months, and we've asked President Tusk to submit to Council an agenda of work so that we can conclude these discussions. So these first decisions are going to help us make concrete progress by deepening the bank union, creating a safety net for companies and for people's savings, which is something that is crucial if you want to improve growth, but also by creating a new roadmap and having a better European stabilization mechanism and a real budget for the Eurozone, and particularly with this convergence and investment mechanism based on the French-German Meseberg proposal. In the coming weeks and months, at the level of finance and economy ministers and level of heads of states and governments, we will have technical / political discussions in order to conclude this process by the end of the year and move forward on finalizing the Eurozone. Let me conclude by saluting the excellent work of Mr. Juncker and Tusk in these difficult times, and also thank Mr. Boyko Borisov for all the things that have been done under the Bulgarian presidency, and I would like to wish Chancellor Kurz, who will take over this Sunday, the best of luck for his presidency. I would also like to thank Chancellor Merkel for her commitment. On the 19th of June last in Meseberg, we have made a historic breakthrough possible. Together with Mrs. Merkel, we have been able to work in a greater European spirit, including on the migrant issue. I'm ready to take your questions. How about the disembarkment platforms and controlled centers? In more concrete terms, when and where do you think that these centers might open? Is it possible that one of such centers might be opened in France? As regards those disembarkment centers, a number of countries, Maghreb countries, have already said no. Italy, through its interior minister, has said today that its own ports will remain closed to NGOs, at least for this summer. So in this context, aren't you afraid that the good intentions expressed today will not be followed through by an actor? In fact, we've heard a rumor that the U.S. president has asked you in private whether France was ready to leave the EU and has, in exchange, promised that you would get a better deal than you do have with the EU commercially. All right, those are not, let's be clear, those are not just good intentions. This is a formal agreement of heads of states and government within the framework of the existing legal framework. And so I'm sure there are lots of comments being made everywhere in Europe, but I know that democratic legitimacy in every country resides in the heads of states of government who, in this case, have signed this agreement. And I know that collective order in Europe is based on law. And there is such a thing as European law, including in the area of migration. As regards the disembarkment centers, which have been proposed with the Human Rights Commission and IOM, countries have to agree to that. The fear is that these centers will become home to many people from the whole region who will congregate there in the hope that they will be transferred to Europe. And so there are fears, there is some degree of alarm, and I have never thought that these centers would be a panacea, but I think that they can be helpful in some context. As I have said, we have worked with Niger. In Niger, we have created almost identical mechanisms with good results and people being sent back to their countries of origin, which has helped contain migration flows to Libya. In November last, on the basis of the 9 points decided in Dakar, we have been able to create such centers, and through our work with IOM and the African Union, we've been able to send millions, thousands of people to their countries of origin with cooperation by the African Union. So those are not just intentions. These are things that already exist, but this has to be done in context when it makes sense. But we're not going to be wagging a little flag that says this is a Barkman Centre, because that would defeat the purpose. But we want to be pragmatic. We want to start doing together the things that France, Italy, or Germany have done separately until now, and to do that within the framework of HRC and IOM. And this is a good answer to some proposals that we felt were unacceptable in our view, which we heard about weeks ago. Some wanted to create disembarkment centers without the green light from HRC or IOM, and by paying countries to host such centers. We have rejected this proposal, which we felt was not in line with our principles. I fought against this suggestion from the very beginning, but the fact that we've gotten this agreement means that we uphold our own principles and we uphold the international law, that is, the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations and an international organization for migration. And so we have heard a lot of impractical solutions, legally impossible solutions. People saying, oh, we'll just push them back. You know, let's just send them back to the... That's not possible. So how do you make sure that you prevent those illegal migrations? Well, by creating such centers, by working with the Coast Guards of the 10 countries, just like we have with Turkey or Libya today. So this is the framework. It is an effective system. It doesn't solve all problems, of course, but it should also be based on clear principles. Now, moving on to the controlled centers that would be established in the territory of European countries. Let's be very specific, and I've tried to do that. This is compliant with Dublin rules and with international law. What do I mean by that? It means that there are international maritime and humanitarian rules when a boat is at sea and there is a humanitarian risk. It should be taken to the closest port. This is the rule. It's an international rule, and it will be respected. Now, there are countries that are first arrival countries. That is the Dublin rule, and we've maintained that rule. And it means that these first arrival countries have a special responsibility. These immigration centers do not exonerate these countries from these obligations. It means that France is, in light of its situation, is not going to open such centers, but the countries that are carrying the burden of these migration flows today are going to be able, if they open such centers, to benefit from European support. This is what Greece already has, what Greece has already said that it wants. Italy might do the same. And this is a European solidarity-based answer to Italy's concerns in terms of financing and organization, and also because from these centers we collectively undertake to pay for these people being sent back to their countries. The migrant problem of Italy is not essentially due to the arrivals, because they've gone down very sharply. It's because around 600,000 foreigners who are illegally in Italy and have no good prospects of having asylum, of getting asylum, are present on Italian territory. And so we need to have a much better system to send them back to their countries. countries, and we need solidarity for that. This is the basic problem that first arrival countries are undergoing, and we're finding answers for that. As you have noticed, I have intensified my contacts with Italy and Spain as first arrival countries, and yesterday, before I got here, with the Visegrad countries, because you might see convergence in their discourse or in the speeches that we hear from these different countries, but in fact, these countries are not on the same line. And so we found a compromise solution. And in answer to your questions, this was built on the basis of an Italian and French proposal that we built yesterday afternoon and built on over the evening and during the night. As for your other question, first of all, whatever is said between closed doors should remain between closed doors. So I never repeat what has been said to me between closed doors. And the second reason is that I want